This is Jonathan Cahn. Welcome to my YouTube channel. When you look at what's happening in the world, it's easy to wonder what's going on, and are things out of control? Is this what the Bible foretold? Is the end near? What do I need to know about the future? Where's it all going? How can I be prepared? What is God's prophetic word for the hour and for me? On this channel, you're going to find prophetic updates, the mysteries of God, daily words for life, biblical revelation, prophetic teachings, and much more. I pray it's going to be a great blessing to you in the days ahead. So be sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time there's a new video that's posted. Leave a comment as to how God is blessing you. And don't forget to share these videos with friends who need to hear them. Thanks again, and God bless you. Shalom.
It is June 1st, 2025. A date like any other on the surface. The sun has risen. The world continues to spin in its frenzy. But in the realm that is unseen, in the realm that governs all things, there is a sound, a whisper, a summoning. Not all will hear it, not all can perceive it, but to the chosen, this day is not just another square on the calendar. It is a divine transmission. Today, heaven is speaking. The Spirit of God is calling out, not through the noise of the world, but through the stillness within. The Word tells us that he who has ears, let him hear. But not all ears can hear what heaven is saying. Because to hear the voice of God, your spirit must be tuned to heaven's frequency. This moment, June 1st, 2025, is not random. It has been marked, pointed, prepared in the eternal scroll long before you and I took our first breath. Why? Because the Lord is separating, dividing, refining, and calling his remnant to rise. Not in popularity, not in worldly strength, but in obedience. There is a voice in the wilderness crying out, "Prepare the way of the Lord." But only the set apart, the consecrated, will hear it. Let me take you back to the time of Elijah. The prophet stood on Mount Horeb, broken and weary. And the Lord told him to stand before him, for he would pass by. And what came? A wind so strong it tore rocks apart. But the Lord was not in the wind. An earthquake, but the Lord was not in the quake. A fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And then a still small voice. That's where God was. Not in the spectacular, not in the attention-grabbing, but in the quiet whisper, only discernible to those who had been emptied of the world's distractions. Today, God is still speaking in that whisper. And those who belong to him must learn to discern it. Let me tell you of a man named Daniel. When Babylon was loud, when kings were shouting and laws were changing, Daniel opened his windows toward Jerusalem and prayed 3 times a day. He didn't post. He didn't protest. He knelt. And God spoke. He revealed visions, gave interpretation, brought prophetic understanding. Why? Because Daniel separated himself. He wouldn't eat the king's meat. He wouldn't bow to the idol. He wouldn't let Babylon change his name, even if it tried. And so heaven opened its mouth to Daniel, while the rest of Babylon remained blind and deaf. In this very hour, the same principle applies. God is not going to shout over the noise of TikTok, the media, the headlines, or the confusion. He's whispering, calling, revealing to those who have separated themselves from Egypt, from Babylon, from Sodom. Now the question is, how do you hear this voice? How do you know you are among the chosen? Let me tell you. 1, you must unplug from the system. You cannot hear God if your ears are full of the static of this world. Turn off the noise. Choose silence. Every prophet was called to the wilderness before being called to the people. 2, you must return to the altar. Build one in your room, in your heart. The fire never falls on an empty altar. Present yourself daily as a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable, pleasing. 3, you must separate. This is not the season for lukewarm living. Compromise will cost you your clarity. God is not speaking to the double-minded. He is speaking to the consecrated. 4, you must read the word like a scroll of fire. Stop reading casually. Read with hunger, with reverence. Ask the Spirit to open your eyes. There are mysteries waiting to be unveiled, but only to the desperate. 5, you must be ready to obey what you hear. Revelation without obedience is judgment in disguise. God doesn't speak to entertain, He speaks to command. And only those willing to act will hear more. God is not silent. That has never been the issue. The issue is not whether the voice of God exists, it's whether the ears of His people are still tuned to hear it. From the very beginning, the voice of God spoke all things into existence. Light didn't appear because of a spark. It appeared because He said, "Let there be light." The sea stopped where it did not because of a natural law, but because the voice of the Lord drew a boundary and said, "You shall come no farther." His voice framed reality, and it still does, but not everyone can hear it. The ones who hear His voice today are not the loudest. They are not the most connected to the platforms of men. They are often unseen, unknown, tucked away in quiet places where the world is. They walk by conviction, not by trends. They don't need applause because they've already been chosen. And for the chosen, hearing God's voice is not just a possibility, it is a necessity, a lifeline. Yet the world grows louder. It screams in the streets, in the screens, in the systems. The volume has been turned up, not by accident, but by design, to drown out the still small voice. So while God continues to speak, fewer are positioned to hear Him. You can't hear Him if your ears are full of Babylon's music. You can't hear Him if your identity is built on Egypt's approval. You can't hear Him if your soul is married to the noise. The ones who hear God's voice are the ones who have been broken away from the crowd. The ones who have walked through seasons of silence, not because God wasn't speaking, but because He was tuning their ears for a higher frequency. God hides His voice from the arrogant. He reveals it to the humble. He speaks not to flatter, but to direct. Not to entertain, but to command. And so hearing becomes a divine gift, one given to the few who still seek instead of scroll, to those who still wait instead of wander. This moment we are living in, June 1st, 2025, is not empty. It is not common. It is not random. There are appointed times on heaven's calendar when God opens windows, moments of divine interruption. This is one of those moments. A prophetic window has opened, but it is not for the casual believer. It is a call to the remnant, a call to those who have refused to bow when the music played, a call to those who have stood even when standing cost them their reputation, their comfort, even their place. There is a summoning in the Spirit, a trumpet that cannot be heard with natural ears, but is thundering in the hearts of those who have been prepared in secret. God is calling the consecrated, those who didn't give up in the silence, those who stayed when others fled, those who still believe when the world calls it foolish. And so the question isn't, is God speaking? The real question is, are you ready to hear? You don't stumble into hearing God's voice. You don't casually access divine instruction. You posture yourself for it. You strip away distraction. You walk away from the crowd. You tune out the world. You lay down your own understanding, and only then, in the stillness, can you hear the whisper that the earth cannot receive. Prophetic windows are not meant to last forever. They open and they close. They are moments in which the Lord calls His people into alignment, into preparation, into deeper obedience. And when the window is open, those who are listening must move. Because to delay is to miss it. And to miss it is to remain behind when God is calling you forward. There are things God is saying right now that won't be said again. There are assignments being released. There are warnings being whispered. There are instructions meant only for those who will act immediately. This is not the time to debate the voice. This is the time to follow it. For the remnant, the voice of God is life. And this moment is a divine checkpoint. a prophetic call to readiness. Heaven is speaking, not in the thunder, not in the fire, but in the still, small voice that only the separated can hear. The chosen don't need signs. They recognize the sound, and when the world looks around and says, "We didn't hear anything," the chosen will already be walking because they heard everything. Heaven is always broadcasting, but not everyone is receiving. There is a frequency in the Spirit that does not compete with the noise of this world. It simply exists above it. It is holy, set apart, sacred. Only those who have separated themselves from the system can hear it. You cannot tune into heaven if your heart is still tuned into the voices of Egypt. God speaks on a frequency that requires consecration to access. The deeper the separation, the clearer the reception. In every generation, God has spoken, but the ones who heard him were never the ones closest to the palace. They were the ones in the wilderness, in the margins, in the caves, on the mountains. Not because God avoids people, but because people avoid silence. People avoid surrender. They cling to comfort, to crowds, to applause. And in doing so, they forfeit the whisper. The whisper of God is not sent to echo through the streets. It is entrusted to the inner chamber, the secret place, to those who have come out from among them. And that separation isn't just physical, it's spiritual. It's not just leaving behind the place, it's leaving behind the mindset. Egypt wasn't just a nation that enslaved Israel. It was a mentality that enslaved their identity. And even when their feet left Egypt, their minds still longed for the leeks and garlic. Their hearts still remembered the chains as if they were comfort. You must leave more than the place. You must leave what the place left inside of you. God didn't speak to his people in Egypt. He sent signs, yes. He sent judgments. He broke the power of Pharaoh. But the intimacy, the covenant, the revelation, that all happened at Sinai. And Sinai was in the wilderness, a mountain far removed from the systems of man. He didn't reveal himself in the comfort zone. Sinai is the place of encounter, but you'll never reach it if you're unwilling to leave the empire. You can't hear God clearly while still dining at Pharaoh's table. You can't drink from the cup of Babylon and expect to receive the secrets of the Most High. The price of hearing is separation, and the cost is worth it, because one word from God can change your life forever. The problem today is not that God is distant, it's that we are double-minded. One foot in the church, the other in the culture. One hand raised in worship, the other holding tightly to compromise. And we wonder why the heavens seem silent. But silence is not absence. Silence is often the result of static, the static of divided loyalty. God will not shout to compete with your distractions. He waits for you to come away. There is something deeply prophetic about the wilderness. It is uncomfortable. It is quiet. It strips away the non-essentials. It confronts what you trust, and it creates a space where your spiritual senses are awakened. That is why the prophets were forged in deserts, not in cities. That is why the Messiah was tempted in the wilderness, not in the synagogue. Because to hear God clearly, you must go where the world cannot follow. When Israel left Egypt, they didn't walk into comfort, they walked into barrenness. But in that barrenness, they saw pillars of fire. They saw manna fall. They heard the voice of God. And though many grumbled and longed to return, the ones who endured the wilderness were the ones who crossed into promise, not because they were better, but because they were willing to let go. The frequency of heaven cannot be picked up through casual devotion. It is found through surrender, through separation, through silence, through wilderness. If your life is filled with noise, you won't hear the signal. But when you walk away from Egypt, when you leave behind the identity the world gave you, when you ascend towards Sinai, something shifts. Your ears open, your heart softens, your spirit becomes sensitive. And suddenly, what you couldn't hear in Egypt becomes clear in the wilderness. God doesn't speak more, you just become still enough to hear. The cloud still descends, the fire still burns, the whisper still speaks, but it waits on the mountain. And only those who are willing to climb, who are willing to be separate, who are willing to walk away from Pharaoh and toward the flame, will hear the words that were written in eternity for this very hour. There comes a time when silence isn't peace, it's judgment. When the voice of God seems distant, we assume he has stopped speaking, but in truth, something inside us has shifted. Spiritual deafness is not a passive condition, it is a symptom of misalignment. When you're out of sync with the heart of God, his voice becomes muffled. When your desires grow louder than his word, your ears can no longer discern his whisper. Misalignment is subtle. It doesn't happen overnight. It begins when compromise is justified, when obedience is delayed, when the fire is no longer fed, and the altar grows cold. You still go through the motions, but the presence is gone. The sensitivity fades. You try to worship, but it feels dry. You try to pray, but the heavens feel like brass. That's not coincidence, that's the mercy of God revealing a warning. He hasn't left, but your position has shifted. You are no longer facing him, and in that shift, your hearing begins to decay. It's possible to sit in church and still be deaf to heaven, to quote the scriptures, but miss the author. To raise your hands while your heart is hidden behind layers of pride, fear, and sin. That's the danger of spiritual routine without spiritual renewal. The greatest threat to the modern believer is not persecution, it's comfort. The comfort that tells you you're fine just as you are. That you don't need to change, don't need to repent, don't need to press in. But when you are too comfortable, your ears grow dull. Throughout the scriptures, when people refuse to repent, God said, "You have ears, but you do not hear." That is judgment language. It's not that he stopped speaking, it's that they refused to adjust their lives to what he had already said. And when you ignore heaven long enough, eventually heaven grows silent. Not because God gave up on you, but because he will not compete with idols. There is a moment, and it's coming quickly, where clarity will become more valuable than comfort. When the storm rises, when the shaking begins, when the deception increases, it won't be enough to hope you heard God. You will need to know. And the only way to know is to live in alignment, to make sure nothing in your life dulls your hearing. No bitterness, no hidden sin, no secret pride, no distraction. Because spiritual deafness may not feel like a crisis today, but in the hour of testing, it will be the difference between those who stand and those who fall. When God speaks, it is not a suggestion. It is not a casual invitation. It is not something you schedule around your comfort. When he speaks, it demands immediate response. Abraham didn't wait until Monday morning to obey. He rose early. Moses didn't weigh his options. When the bush began to burn, he turned aside and moved toward it. When the disciples were called, they dropped their nets and followed. Delayed obedience is disobedience in disguise. God does not speak for entertainment. He speaks to commission. And when the voice of the Lord thunders into your life, it means something in your life must shift now, not later. You don't get to analyze the call from the safety of the shore. You step into the water, you move when he moves. Because every word from his mouth carries a timestamp in eternity. There is a window, and when the window closes, what was delayed becomes disqualified. There are destinies that were forfeited because the response was too slow. There are callings that died on the altar of comfort. There are assignments that were given to others because the first vessel refused to move, and so God bypassed them and found someone who would respond immediately, not perfectly, but quickly. The cost of hesitation is higher than we think. You don't just miss an opportunity, you miss alignment, blessing, timing, and purpose. This generation has been trained to wait until it feels right, until it's convenient, until the stars align. But heaven doesn't operate on human convenience. When the Spirit says move, you move. When he says speak, you speak. When he says go, you go, even if the way is unclear. The chosen don't wait for ideal conditions. They move at the sound of the trumpet. They obey even when it costs them comfort, certainty, or safety, because they know that when the voice of God speaks, it is a holy interruption, and every second of delay is disobedience in disguise. So if you feel like you haven't heard God lately, it's not time to ask, why is he silent? It's time to ask, where have I drifted? And if you have heard him, even in a whisper, don't hesitate. Obey now. Respond now. Move now. Because the ones who act immediately are the ones he trusts with the next instruction. June 1st is not just a date, it is a gate. And gates are not passive. They are crossed only by those who are watching, waiting, and willing. The Spirit of the Lord is moving. Not where the crowds are, but where the crowds are consecrated. Wait. Not in stadiums of applause, but in caves of prayer. Listen, can you hear it? The wind is shifting. The seals are opening. The king is positioning his army. And you, yes, you, are not listening to this by accident. The Lord is speaking to you now. Come out from among them, says the Lord, and I will receive you. Let this be the day you step into your calling. Let this be the hour you turn down the volume of the world and tune your ears to the frequency of heaven, because God is speaking, and only the chosen will hear. Let the world scroll, let the nations rage, but you kneel. He is speaking. Will you answer?